of these six forces, all of them, are present in every human being. The heart, the moral compass, the part that already knows before the mind has formed a single thought, before the ego has stepped forward, before anything else has spoken. What is right in this moment? It speaks once quietly without argument. Let's analyze the mind. The mind is the rationalizer, the most sophisticated servant in the system. It does not decide which force wins. It just arrives after the dominant force has already stepped forward. Number 3, the ego, the default dominant force, primarily directive, self-continuity, the preservation of the current version of you. Let's look at the body, the fourth force, the gateway and conditioning force. Everything that enters through the senses, what the eyes rest on, what the ears absorb, what the appetite consumes, what the physical desires are allowed to pursue. Fifth force, the spirit, the only force not primarily centered around protection. The sixth force, external influence. These are all the outside forces which shape everything on the inside. All those episodes that we have now covered up until this stage, all those prior episodes have given you something very unique that which most people will never ever receive in their entire lifetime. Not because it was unavailable, it's because nobody gave it to them in a form they could actually use. They were told to be better, to try harder, to have more discipline, more willpower, more consistency, more of whatever quality they appeared to be lacking in the moments that mattered the most. And they tried. And they failed and they tried again, and the pattern repeated itself. And eventually, gradually, quietly, without a single dramatic moment of surrender, they concluded that this is just who I am. Not because they were broken, because they were trying to change outputs without understanding the forces generating them. You now have something different. You who are listening to this, who have listened to the previous episodes, you have access to something very unique. What that is the map. You have the map, not a motivational framework, not a set of principles to aspire you and motivate you forward, not another system that tells you what to do without telling you what is actually running underneath your decisions. A precise diagnostic map of the forces operating inside your operating system, the forces that were always running before you named them, before you understood them, before you had any language for why the same patterns kept producing the same outcomes, no matter how many times you resolved to change them. That map changes everything. Not because it gives you new information about yourself, because it gives you the ability to see for the very first time what was always already there. And once you can see it, you cannot unsee it. And this is where it is so interesting to dive deep and understand what this is all about in terms of the complete map. All six forces together in one place, visible for the first time as a single coherent system. And let me map this out for you. And before I do that, I just want to mention that all these six forces, all of them, are present in every human being. All of them, myself, yourself, everyone that you know. All of these six forces operate simultaneously. All of them competing in every moment of the day to govern what you think, what you feel, and what you do. Let's analyze them one by one. The heart, the moral compass, the part that already knows before the mind has formed a single thought, before the ego has stepped forward, before anything else has spoken. What is right in this moment? It speaks once quietly without argument. It has never once been wrong. And it loses to the ego more often than any other force in the system. Not because it is weak, but because it refuses to negotiate. Let's analyze the mind. For those of you who've been through all the previous series, this is familiar territory for you, but I'm just summarizing everything in one single episode, which I've not done before. The mind is the rationalizer, the most sophisticated servant in the system. It does not decide which force wins. It just arrives after the dominant force has already stepped forward, and it builds that force in the best possible case using your own knowledge, your own language, your own values, your own history. So it's the advocate, the lawyer, which is arguing the case for that most dominant force of that moment in time. The more intelligent you are, the more convincing the case it presents against you. Just let that land for a moment. The more self-aware you are, the more sophisticated the self-deception. The mind is not your highest authority. It is the operating system's most capable lawyer. Number 3, the ego, the default dominant force, primarily directive, self-continuity, the preservation of the current version of you. It operates in 2 modes: advancing self-promotion, narrative ownership, selective perception, social positioning. That is what most people consciously recognize as the ego. And then it also has a defense mechanism where most people experiences fear, the ego protecting its image, its narrative, its social position from the cost of genuine change. This is not a separate force. This is the same force operating in the defensive mode, in a different mode basically. When you feel afraid to try, the ego is defending against the exposure of genuine attempt. When you feel afraid of what people will think, the ego is defending its social position. When something inside of you consistently finds the reason why this particular moment is not quite right, the ego is defending. And the mind is building a case on its behalf. The ego was always running. It was running before you knew it existed, and it will continue to run until something stronger and more consistent displaces it. Let's look at the body, the 4th force, the gateway and conditioning force. Everything that enters through the senses, what the eyes rest on, what the ears absorb, what the appetite consumes, what the physical desires are allowed to pursue, shapes the operating conditions for every other force simultaneously. So you cannot underestimate what you expose your eyes to, your ears, and what things that you basically pursue, which me and you call desire. The body force, ungoverned, amplifies the ego and suppresses the heart and spirit. The body force, calibrated, creates the conditions in which the quieter forces can be heard. So what you consistently allow through the gateway determines which forces get stronger and which get weaker every day, usually without your awareness. Now let's analyze the 5th force, the spirit. The only force not primarily centered around protection, but it's more geared towards direction. It's more geared towards purpose, meaning, the sense that your life is oriented towards something beyond the management of your own comfort and desires. So when the spirit is genuinely active, it does not compete with the other forces by being louder. It changes what they are all competing for. The ego's hunger for status becomes less urgent. The defensive mode relaxes. The mind serves something larger than its own cleverness. The body is governed as an instrument rather than indulged as a comfort. So when the spirit is absent, starved through years of comfort seeking, distraction, desires, the ego fills the space by default. And that hollowness that most people feel, the vague sort of emptiness that something inside of them is missing, is the spirit's signal to you that something is not right. It's transmitting that message to you, which some people hear, some people don't hear. But many times people just feel the symptoms of that restlessness when the spirit is telling them that it's feeling that emptiness. And this is that operating system inside of us doing what it is supposed to be doing. And now let's analyze the final sixth force, which is external influence. This is the force through which everything outside shapes the inside, the family system that installed the earliest, most durable configurations before you had the capacity to examine them. The culture that defined what success means and what failure costs before you choose your own definitions. The algorithm that has been amplifying your ego and suppressing your spirit every day since you first picked up a smartphone or were connected to the internet. The crowd whose ambient expectations shape what feels possible and what feels off limits. External influence does not create your internal forces, it adjusts their volume levels and helps them in the competing fight as to who will dominate. And the most effective external influences never feel like influences. They feel like you. You feel like you're making this decision, but not realizing how that decision has been shaped by these external influences. I want to also highlight something else very important, that only becomes visible when all six forces are understood and seen together. That point is that these forces do not operate individually, they operate in coalitions. And it is that specific coalition, when it is active in any given person, which then sort of controls which forces are dominant, which are suppressed, which are being amplified externally and produce those recognizable human behaviors which are run by that particular operating system. Let me show you this through a specific story. A man ran a successful business for 15 years, brilliant, respected, the kind of person whose judgment others sought. But inside that business, nobody challenged him. Not because he was aggressive, because over the years of being right more often than everyone around him, his ego had quietly conflated competence with infallibility. The mind built the case each time. You have the track record. You see things others miss. You have earned the right to lead. The heart occasionally signaled otherwise. He ignored it. His team learned not to push back. His closest relationships developed a careful distance, and he had no idea any of it was happening because from inside the operating system, it did not feel like the ego was running the show. It felt like just normal standards. That is the God complex, ego creating a situation which leads to a person being unchallenged. The mind gets recruited, the heart gets suppressed, a pattern so invisible from inside that the person experiencing it genuinely believes they are simply being rigorous. Now consider someone entirely different. A woman in the same career for 12 years, very capable, intelligent, respected, and privately paralyzed. Every opportunity slightly not right, every risk slightly too large, every moment of genuine commitment met with a reason why a little more preparation would be wise. The ego in this instance is in chronic defensive mode, protecting against the one thing it cannot tolerate, genuine attempt followed by genuine failure. Defended for so long, the defense has become identity. She does not experience it as the ego protecting itself. She experiences it as being realistic. These are not random. These are not character flaws. These are the predictable outputs of specific sort of force coalitions. Every human being, without exception, has this structure underneath it. Everyone, including me, including you. Now, I want to take this map to a place most frameworks never go, because here is what becomes visible when you look at the same force. So it's the same forces in coalition, not just as individual operating forces across the whole scale. The difficult colleague with a God complex, the controlling partner, the parent whose anxiety fills every room, the friend whose approval seeking has made every relationship about them. These are ordinary, painful stories of everyday life. Yes, ordinary. Now let's look at the same force coalition at a higher power, the ego advancing at maximum intensity, with the mind fully recruited, the heart completely suppressed, the spirit replaced by ideology, and external influence providing an entire social system that validates and amplifies that particular dominant force. This is not just a difficult colleague. That is a dictator. And that dictator could be running a country or could be running a household with just a few people living in them. The same force coalition that makes someone insufferable at a dinner table, at sufficient scale, with sufficient power, with sufficient external amplification, produces the most destructive figures in human history. Same forces, but different scale. You've heard of the most abhorrent dictators that the world has ever produced: Stalin, Hitler, many more. Different contexts, different ideologies, different cultural frameworks. Same operating system. Ego advancing without limit, the heart suppressed completely, the mind recruited entirely in service of that dominant force. Spirit replaced by the performance of a cause. External influence providing an entire nation as the amplifying environment. And this also is happening right now under our nose in the sort of resurgence of right-wing ideology across Europe and the West, and many other ideologies as well, especially through the algorithms. People have now been amplified, connected together, and now this is playing out right across the world in front of our own eyes. This is not just a political observation. This is a system diagnosis, and it matters not because most people will ever operate at that scale, but because the forces producing destruction at that scale are the same forces operating in every human being, and the same human being with those destructive forces operating inside of them will cause harm. If they're not doing it as a dictator running a country, they'll be doing it as someone running a company, someone running a household with even just a few people like a spouse and their own children living under their tyranny, including you, including me. The difference between the person who is merely difficult and the person who is genuinely destructive is not a different set of forces. It is a degree of governance. How much the heart is heard, how much the ego is disciplined, how much the spirit provides a direction that is larger than the self, and how much the external environment amplifies or suppresses those governing forces. That understanding, fully absorbed, changes how you see every difficult person in your life, not with excuse, but with precision. Because a person whose operating system you can diagnose accurately is a person whose behavior you can navigate intelligently, rather than one whose behavior continues to confuse and hurt you without explanation. You basically now fully understand why they act the way they act. So let me bring this complete map into your own life. Think about someone you have been struggling to understand, a relationship that keeps producing the same outcome, a person whose behavior confuses or hurts you without explanation. Now look at them through the lens of this particular framework. Let's map their behavior, not to judge, but to diagnose which force is dominant in them. Is the ego advancing, making every interaction about position and narrative? Is it defending, finding reasons to avoid the vulnerability genuine connection requires? Is the spirit there or is it absent, so that the relationship is primarily a vehicle for comfort or validation rather than genuine mutual investment? What is the external influence that installed that particular software in that person's mind before they were even aware they had one? That shift from confusion to diagnosis changes everything about how you navigate the relationship, because behavior you cannot explain controls you. Behavior you can diagnose precisely, you can respond to intelligently. Now let's turn that inwardly. Think about the recurring patterns in your own life. The argument that keeps escalating the same way. The opportunity that keeps being delayed for the same reason. The version of yourself that keeps showing up in the moment that matters most, despite every intention to show up differently. Which force is winning in those moments? Is it the ego? Advancing, protecting position, narrative, status? Is it the ego defending, finding the reason why this specific moment is not quite right for the change that you keep intending? Or is it the body force, reaching for comfort rather than engaging with what the heart is pointing towards? Is the spirit playing any part in this? Is it allowed to rise up and flourish inside of you, or is it suppressed and therefore absent? So the other forces are competing in a vacuum with nothing larger to orient towards. So these are the questions that me and you should be asking ourselves. Just remember, whatever is happening in our lives, that pattern, that behavior is not random. It always has a force structure underneath it. And that moment you can see that structure, you have a precise point of intervention. Not a vague intention to be better, a specific force to govern in a specific moment. Here is how the complete map functions as the framework, as a practical diagnostic tool. Every time you notice a pattern recurring in your behavior, in your relationships, in your professional work life, the map gives you a 4-step diagnostic tool. Step 1, identify the behavior, not the justification, not the story around it, but the behavior itself. I escalated the argument. I delayed that decision again. I said yes when I knew the answer was no. I chose comfort when I knew what was needed. Step 2, identify which force was dominant in that moment. Not which force you wish had been dominant, but which one was actually winning. Was it the ego advancing or defending? Was it the body force reaching for immediate relief? Was it the spirit? Was it there or was it absent? Nothing larger to orient towards in that particular moment in time. Step 3, identify what the heart was saying before that dominant force stepped forward. Because the heart always speaks first, and mostly it gives you the truth. And it always gives you the truth. Not mostly, it always gives you the truth. There was a moment, brief, quiet, easy to miss moment where something already knew what was right. What was it saying, and what happened in that moment between the heart signal and the dominant force's response? Step 4, identify the external influence that is amplifying the dominant force. Which environment is turning this particular force's volume up? Which relationship, which platform, which community? Because the force rarely operates in isolation. It is always being amplified by something outside. So these 4 steps, applied consistently, applied honestly, applied in the moment rather than only in retrospect, are the practical application of everything this series has been building. Not as a one-time exercise, but as a daily practice. in order to bring long-lasting change. I want to say one more important thing before we close this particular phase of the series that we started, before we move to phase 2. And that is that what we have been discussing up to now is a framework, not a verdict on you as your character. It's a map of this operating system, the framework, and not that you have some sort of a character failure or there's a moral failure. These are forces we are discussing which are an evidence of a human operating system that has been shaped by forces more powerful than any individual's capacity to resist. The ego is the most dominant force, not because you are selfish. And also, when we look around us, we'll see if the vast majority of the people are operating their life from their ego. That's why we're always clashing with people, we're arguing with people, we'll fall out with people. It's because the ego is the dominant force, default force, which is running your operating system. Until you do not consciously make a decision to bring other forces into play, the ego will continue to run your daily life, and it will basically be the default dominant force. The spirit, being largely absent, is not evidence of shallowness. It is a predictable result of an environment specifically engineered to prevent the conditions in which the spirit can operate. The body force ungoverned is not weakness. It is the output of the most sophisticated commercial system in human history, operating at an industrial scale, designed with extraordinary precision to keep the body force in a state of chronic stimulation, whether it's the constant consumption of food, the constant consumption of stimulation for the mind through all the social media entertainment that is provided to us at our fingertips, at demand. Understanding this whole system, the framework, removes shame. And removing shame is not about making excuses. It's about freeing up the energy that was being consumed by self-condemnation and redirecting it towards the actual work, which is governance. Governance is a very important word. It's something that which we focus on when running companies and institutions, but we fail to implement that same level of due diligence and governance when we are running our lives. This is something that we overlook. The map that we have outlined is not the destination. The map is just a guidance for you as to, if you go here, this is what's going to happen. If you go here, this is where you will reach. The actual North Star, the destination, is creating a character which is, for me and you, the ambition should be a fully integrated human being with an operating system in which the heart leads, the ego serves rather than governs, the spirit directs, and the body and the mind are instruments of all of it. That is where this entire framework has been pointing. We will get there, but first we will now introduce phase 2 from the next episode onwards, which is also going to be a game changer for you. Everything now up until what we've discussed has been a game changer, but this is game changer, but it's going to get better. In phase 1, we map the forces. In phase 2, we map the people. Yes, it's going to get really fascinating from here onwards. The archetypes of the different people operating in society, in our lives, in our network, the specific, recognizable, precisely diagnosed human operating patterns that the forces produce in combination. And I want to tell you what is going to happen when we get there. You are going to recognize people instantly. From when I describe the archetypes, you're going to say, yes, that's him, that's her, that's my family member. not vaguely, not approximately, but with precision. You're going to be able to put people in different categories based on those operating systems. You will recognize those people in your own life who operate with a God complex and understand for the very first time exactly why they behave the way they do, why they are sort of not changing, what will cause them to change. You will recognize the dominant spouse, the invisible spouse. You'll be able to go into relationships and be able to tell which forces are dominating that person's life. You will recognize the iron matriarch, the perpetual son, the cycle runner, the approval seeker, the performer, the underminer. You'll recognize them in the people around you. And in some cases, you will recognize yourself. This is why it's going to be a very uncomfortable journey for many.